Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer where we're going to break down exactly how a PCIe expansion chassis extends your computing power. If you've ever found yourself totally out of physical space for GPUs, NVMe storage, or data acquisition cards inside your main server, you've probably looked at expansion chassis. But how do they actually work? Today, we're popping the hood to demystify this tech and see exactly how it seamlessly bridges the gap between a host CPU and external high-performance devices. So take a look at this physical setup we've got here. On the left, there's a standard host server, and it's physically separated from this rugged expansion chassis full of powerful cards over on the right. And they're connected by just a single thick cable. From the outside, it looks incredibly simple, right? But structurally, it's doing something pretty profound. You're physically removing high-performance PCIe endpoints from the motherboard itself and just placing them in an entirely different box. Which leads us to the real question. How does all this complex data actually cross that physical gap without a massive performance hit or requiring some crazy complex protocol translation? I mean, when you're dealing with top-tier GPUs or high-speed NVMe storage, even a microsecond of latency or a slight bandwidth bottleneck can totally tank your system's efficiency. So how exactly does the system trick the computer into thinking those external cards are just sitting right there on the local motherboard? Well, here's our roadmap to figure that out. 1. Extending the motherboard. 2. The end-to-end path. 3. Inside the OSS 5081 backplane. 4. Bandwidth and performance sharing. And finally, 5. The final takeaway. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Extending the Motherboard, where we'll look at the structural philosophy behind all of this. Think of extending your motherboard kind of like adding a new wing to an office building. Look at how perfectly this maps out. Your CPU? That's the main office where all the big decisions happen. The native PCIe bus, or root complex, is the main hallway leading right out of that office. Now, our expansion gear, the OSS 579 adapters, those act as structural hallway extensions. The OSS 581 backplane inside the chassis is your distribution center where the hallway splits. And finally, those PCIe endpoint cards are the brand new offices connected to that center. So the infrastructure just grew, but the building itself, fundamentally the exact same. Moving right along to Section 2, the end-to-end path. Let's trace the actual data journey. Okay, follow these steps with me. The data travels seamlessly from the host's root complex on the motherboard right into an OSS 579 host adapter that you've installed in a standard PCIe slot. From there, it shoots across the external Gen 5 X16 cable, arrives at the OSS 579 target adapter inside the chassis, and goes straight into the Broadcom switch. And the best part? This entire sequence is 100% transparent to the operating system. Your OS just sees standard devices attached to its bus during its normal startup enumeration. No extra steps required. But what's really fascinating here is what the system does not do. The data literally never changes languages. There's no translation into Ethernet, TCP/IP, USB, or fiber channel. Absolutely none of that. It remains native PCIe transaction layer packets, or TLPs, the entire time. That means memory reads, memory writes, and DMA transactions happen exactly as they would if the card was plugged straight into the motherboard, which, as you can imagine, keeps overhead incredibly low. Okay, Section 3. Inside the OSS 581 backplane, let's take a closer look at this distribution center. Inside the backplane, we see an exact 1-to-5 splitting action. Looking at this architecture, that single upstream connection comes in from the host, hits the integrated Broadcom PCIe switch, and then simply branches out to 5 independent downstream Gen 5 X16 slots. This backplane acts as the ultimate distribution center for those new downstream offices we talked about. It allows you to plug in a GPU, an NVMe drive, and a network card, all in the exact same external box. Now, that Broadcom switch sits at the absolute center of this whole operation. It is heavily burdened, but man, it is highly capable. It actively routes host-to-endpoint transactions, maintains independent PCIe links with all installed downstream devices, and hey, when a destination link is busy, it buffers packets. It even dynamically arbitrates simultaneous traffic from multiple endpoints and applies PCIe credit-based flow control. And it manages to do all of this without multiplying the physical bandwidth of the upstream link. And again, just to emphasize the absolute magic of this native architecture, the switch does all of this complex routing without ever using MAC addresses or IP network protocols. It just doesn't need to. It relies strictly on the PCIe bus hierarchy, configuration info, and memory address mappings that your computer's BIOS already discovered during startup. It's elegant, it's direct, and honestly, it's incredibly fast. All right, moving to section 4, bandwidth and performance sharing. Let's talk about the actual laws of physics here. So, while each downstream link negotiates its speed independently based on whatever the endpoint card supports, they are all ultimately constrained by hard physical capacity limits. For instance, if you've got a Gen 4 X8 card installed, it's going to negotiate exactly that speed, which is about 15.75 gigabytes per second, even if it's sitting right there in a Gen 5 X16 slot. The system is just smart enough to adapt to the specific hardware you plug into it. But this is the big number you've got to remember, 63. 63 gigabytes per second in each direction, or 126 gigabytes per second aggregate full duplex. That is the massive theoretical limit of a Gen 5 X16 upstream link. That is the literal pipe going back to the host CPU. So if you've got 5 heavy-duty GPUs running simultaneously in the chassis, the switch arbitrates their data, sure, but they must all share that single 63 gigabyte per second upstream pipeline to talk to the host. So the really crucial point to take away here is that your end-to-end performance is strictly bottlenecked by the lowest bandwidth segment in your path. I mean, you could have a chassis completely packed with top-tier GPUs, but if your host motherboard only has a Gen 4 X8 slot available, well, that just became your entire system speed limit. You simply cannot push Gen 5 data through a Gen 4 pipe. It just doesn't work. Which brings us to Section 5, the final takeaway, and how to scale this tech effectively. Always remember the fundamental dynamic of this system. Downstream, you've got up to 5 independent connections. They negotiate their own speeds, and they can even talk directly to each other peer-to-peer if your setup allows for it. But upstream, you have a shared, arbitrated bandwidth pool connecting everything back to the host CPU. It really is a delicate balance between immense local capacity and shared central communication. Just as our building analogy stated so perfectly at the beginning, adding this expansion chassis doesn't somehow alter the fundamental rules of PCIe communication. It doesn't require any new software protocols or network translation layers. It simply provides you with more native capacity, more electrical power, and more physical cooling space so your high-performance hardware can operate exactly as it was designed to. So I'm going to leave you with this thought to explore further in your own data centers or workstations. Take a close look at your own motherboards, your PCI slots, and your endpoint cards. Are you accidentally plugging a next-generation chassis into a previous-generation slot? Just think about it. How might a single legacy bottleneck be limiting your true scaling potential? Understanding that one little concept is honestly the key to unlocking the full power of PCI expansion. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.